2. We're in business. This is Penn Woods interviewing for the Oklahoma Living Legends. I'm at the home of Mrs. George Calvert, who is known as also as Maude Calvert, who Mrs. Calvert is prominent in Oklahoma City for a long time, has been a long-time member of the board and a charter member of the board, the longest-term member of the board of the Oklahoma Society for Crippled Children. She's also been active in many other things in Oklahoma City. She has been admitted to the Oklahoma Hall of Fame and has received many honors that for her activity in Oklahoma and in Oklahoma City. So I'm going to ask Ms. Calvert to begin with. She wanted to talk first about the Crippled Children's Society, so we will talk first about that, except I do want to start by getting a little of your personal background. I want to ask you where you were born and who your parents were and where you went to school and when you came to Oklahoma City. Then we'll swing over to Crippled Children, then we'll swing back into some of these things you don't want to talk about. Could you tell us where you were born and who your parents were?
Born in Effingham, Kansas, in 1892. My parents were Mr. and Mrs. Samuel A. Richmond. My mother's name was Ada. I'm a twin, an identical twin. And even when we were babies, when my mother was nursing us, she had trouble deciding which one she had nursed last, so she had to pin a ribbon on, tell us apart. All through the years when Bess was living, well, we had that kind of trouble changing with the boys, and they never did find it out but once. We just got caught once all through the years as we dated.
Your mother's and your father's maiden names?
My mother's maiden name was Ada Lookabaugh. She's Lookabaugh. And my daddy was Samuel A. Richmond. It was a German name, and originally it was spelled R-E-I-C-H-M-A-N, and they changed it to R-I-C-H-M-A-N.
Where did you go to school?
I went to school, district number 51, Blaine County, to the rural school.
In Blaine County?
In Blaine County.
Why don't you, we'll talk a little about those early days first. Why don't you tell us what schools were, what year were you in, did you graduate from high school there?
From high school in 1909, from Gary High School.
Gary High School. And could you describe high school at that time, what the school was like?
Well, about all it was I finished 8th grade, took the county examination before I went over there, and when we got over there, they decided they'd have to put us in the 8th grade, and they put us in the 8th grade for a month, and then decided they'd have to put us in the 9th grade, so we started a month late in algebra and Latin and history and English. We had 5 subjects, and we had to work real hard to catch up with the rest of them, but we did. There was only 5 in our class.
Well,
that's how big the school was.
In Blaine County and Gary, can you recall, do you recall any of the early leaders of the town at the time you were there? People that were memorable people to you there?
Well, Breaks had they had one of the stores, I think it was a furniture store and undertaking, and the Blackards, who lived here later, C.E. Blackards, had the dry goods store, and the Garveys that live here in Oklahoma City, had the grocery store. Mm-hmm. That's all the stores they had.
All the stores they had there. How big was Gary at that time?
Well, I don't know. You mean the numbers?
About how big?
Oh, I wouldn't think it'd be more than 2,000. Mm-hmm. It was a very small little place.
Where did you go to college?
I went to the normal school first. After finishing high school at Gary, I went to the normal school at Weatherford for 2 years. But in the meantime, there was 4 terms, 3 in the 3 months, and then the summer. So what we'd do would either go to school 6 months and teach 6 months, my sister and I. And so in 3 years, we finished high school and also had done 2 years of teaching. You
were well experienced when you finished high school.
Yeah.
What were some of the unusual problems that you had in teaching at that time? What were some of the problems of a teacher at that time compared to today? And the problems and the advantages and disadvantages that you may have had.
Well, I think it was very simple compared to what it is today. Children were easier handled. Although I remember when I was in high school and we were substitute teachers, my twin sister and I went in to take charge of a room when a teacher got sick, and all of a sudden all the kids were gone. And we got looking around and they'd crawl down in their seats. So my sister said, all right, we'll just put the names of all of them down and take them to the principal, all of them that are gone. So about that time they all began to get back into their seats. That was my first teaching experience, but they played pranks on teachers then, substitute teachers, just like they do now, but it was very simple compared to the organized groups that we have now.
Can you think of any interesting or unusual or highlights of the college at Weatherford during your period you were there?
Well, do you remember J.F. Sharp?
No, you didn't.
In the early days, you know, he is the one that, you know, they had a lot of beautiful statues there that they bought, and he decided that they weren't modest enough, so he had them trim them down. Don't you remember that? That's a true story.
Well, and he was Mr. Sharp.
He was the president.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's right. That was written up in all the papers everywhere in that time. That was one very unusual thing that happened. That's about. I don't know that there was anything too unusual about it.
What were these statues, like the one on your piano?
Oh no. No, you know the art.
Were these some of the old Grecian art?
Oh yes. Mm-hmm.
And so he trimmed them down.
Yeah.
Wonder what ever happened to that statuary?
Well, he was criticized all over the country, and there were editorials written about him, and finally he decided that if that's what they wanted, he'd just pay for some new ones. Mm-hmm. And I think that's what he did.
He'd have a hard time in today's colleges, wouldn't he?
Yes, he sure would.
Can you think of any other highlights in the college? That's an excellent story.
Highlights, well.
Any other events? What's the major event during the college when you were there?
Well, they had essays. They had things that everybody had to be in one or another of two literary societies. And the thing that I remember most vividly is that I had little enough gumption to write an essay and compete with a girl that had already won 4 times. And her name was Cloyd, Dorothy Cloyd. Dick Cloyd, that lived here later, was her brother. And I won over her. And that put me in a pretty bad place for quite a while, because they thought there was some partiality shown or something, because I was just a little green girl from the country.
What did you do after you got out of college?
Taught.
Where'd you teach?
I taught in the district number 51, where I went to school. It was 2-room then, and my sister took the lower grades, and I took the high grades and acted as principal. And then I taught in the Cheyenne High School, and went to school in the summertime. And finally I went to school. My folks in the meantime had left the farm and moved to Stillwater so we could all go to college. Daddy thought at first he wanted every one of us to have a farm, and he was trying to get enough so we'd have a quarter section of land. And then he found out all we wanted to do was go to school, so he just moved to Stillwater and let us go to college. We all did. There were 9 of us.
And you graduated from
Stillwater.
At what year?
1916.
1916. Mm-hmm. And you were, when were you married?
I was married in 1923. In the meantime, though, I taught school, did when.
Well, we'll swing back into that. I think we'll talk a little bit about the Crippled Children Society now, and then we'll swing back into a little more of the early days. You became interested in the Crippled Children's program before the society was organized. What caused your interest in
My earliest interest was in the home. My mother was always finding somebody that needed some help, and she'd bring them down home and take care of them. And so I knew what it was to be around crippled children from the very earliest infancy in my home. But I also was taking care of crippled children the day Mr. Abbott, who had just taken over the job, that rehabilitation, civilian rehabilitation, came to see me to ask me to be on this board. I had a man with a crippled man, and he had taken his wooden leg off because he was working on the edge of a bank. And then I had a girl in the house doing housework who had a very bad burn, but she had finished Hills Buildings College. And because she was so handicapped in looks, she couldn't get a job. So that was my first interest in handicapped people.
The Crippled Children Society was formed in 1925. Is that right?
It seems to me it was earlier than that, but maybe not. I guess you know.
1925, and you were asked by Mr. Abbott to serve on the first board.
Yes, he came at the suggestion of the committee that was meeting. It was a committee of civic people who had been to some international meeting and heard Daddy Allen. And that's how they happened to get the inspiration. It was made up mostly of Rotarians and people that had been interested in crippled children. We had Earl McBride, was instrumental in taking care of crippled children very early, before our society was organized.
Who was Daddy Allen?
He was the president of the International Society for Crippled Children.
For how long?
I don't know, long years.
Did you know him?
Daddy
Yes,
he was a Rotarian, but he was the father of a handicapped child. He lived in Ohio.
I didn't know he was the father of a handicapped child.
Did you know you knew him?
Well, yes, I knew him.
Can you tell me something about him?
That's all I know about him was just his interest in crippled children. He just came here and organized. Well, he talked about our work and talked about the need for it, and then Mr. Howlett, who was the secretary of the International Society, really came and stayed with us for several months. And Mr. Riles, who was vocational education director, paid his salary so that he could get the work started.
Who was the first director then? Mr. Abbott was
Yes.
the first director. Tell us something about him.
You mean of crippled children?
Yes.
No. Joe Hamilton was first director of the crippled children. Mr. Abbott was in rehabilitation, civilian rehabilitation. See, they just passed that law about 2 or 3 years before we were organized.
And Joe Hamilton was the head of it for a long time.
He was the director. He was not. He was Mr. Wentz was on the board, and he really was responsible very largely for our getting Joe Hamilton.
Mm-hmm. Tell us something about Lou Wentz.
Well, his chief interest had been crippled children for a number of years, and he had been taking children to Kansas City, I think, to the Shriners Hospital, when he'd find somebody crippled that needed attention, and he didn't think it could be done here.
You've known him also as a personality, as an individual. He's certainly a legend name to so many people who've never met him. Could you tell us a little about him, his personality, or as an individual?
He was very, very modest, and he didn't want anybody to ever tell anything that he had done. He liked to do things, but he didn't like to have you talk about it. And I think he was at one time extremely poor, and then when he struck oil, he got extremely rich, and he always seemed just a little bit modest about talking about what he could do. But when we talked about getting Joe Hamilton for this job that Wally has now, I objected to having him come to take the job because we were going to have to depend on volunteer, contributions. And I didn't see how Joe could, with his family, come and do that. So I told them I didn't think they ought to ask him, and Lou Wentz says, well, why? And I said, well, I'm thinking about his salary and the fact that he'd have to have expense. And he said, well, I'll take care of that. So he underwrote that for all those years I'm getting horse.
Yes, what were some of the organizations that were involved in the incorporation?
Well, there was the Federation of Women's Clubs, the PTA, mostly the Rotary Club and the Lions Club. I think that were giving more of their attention to blind people, but they really were also interested in the society. So it was the civic clubs and the women's clubs, the leading women's clubs of the state.
Where did they find Joe Hamilton? Where was he when they...
He was the superintendent of schools at Ponca City, and that's where Lou Wentz knew him. And when he suggested him, that's when I made the objection to his coming, or to our asking him to come, because I was thinking about the good salary I knew he was drawing up there and what he might run into down here. And that's when Lou Wentz said he'd take care of that, and he did. And he intended to leave money. The last time he talked to me, he told me that he was going to leave money enough to the Crippled Children that they'd never have to worry about the salary of their director. But he died the next day, and he didn't get it done.
Mm-hmm. Who were some of the other people who took a lead in this early program?
Well, Allen Street, and you got any more there? Of course. Well, this Earl McBride, these doctors, Earl McBride and Dr. West and Dr. Sisler and Dr. Cunningham were the doctors that gave their time free when we first started. And Kitty Shanklin was at the University Hospital as a social worker, and Mrs. Witt was doing something similar to that in Tulsa. Earl Bridges was the first president. And he got his inspiration by going up to that meeting. And this Mr. Bartlett was from Clinton.
Harry Bartlett.
Yeah.
Can you think of now? What part did you play in the early portion? What on the board? What was your assignment?
I've been on the executive committee ever since it was organized.
Have you worked on any, in addition, I presume, you've worked on various special committees?
Yes.
What area has your main involvement been?
Whatever they asked me to do.
Mm-hmm.
It's been different things through the years.
I see,
I got help for the children in the hospitals that were lonely through the hospitality club. I really was responsible for getting the Oklahoma Hospitality Club to go in there and visit with the children and take them toys, and while they were here, just on a short time while they were in the hospital.
What was the exact role that the society played in bringing services to the handicapped?
Well, they went out and found them first. That was one of the big things that had to be done. They had all these clinics all over Oklahoma, and that's the way they found out where they were, and it was a free diagnostic clinic.
I noticed that it broadened its concept in the 1940s and added certain things. Could you tell about that? What they added in the 1940s?
Of course. Oh yes. Well, that's when they included speech and hearing disabilities.
Mm-hmm.
And in the 50s, they promoted the concept of special education for the handicapped child.
Mm-hmm.
They used Easter Seal money, I think, didn't
Mm-hmm. Did the society play a role, and has it played a role in getting special education involved in the education program in the schools?
Yes, they're almost totally responsible for what's been done.
How did they do this? What efforts?
By working with the people in the State Department of Education.
Mm-hmm.
They've never tried to go in and take it over. They've just used their influence to point up the need for it.
Ms. Calvert, maybe you can tell them about what happened when the legislature appropriated the money in 1951 and failed to appropriate money for the director's salary.
Yeah.
It's an interesting story.
1951.
Switch, Steve, switch it up. Yes, that in 1951 he mentioned that they had appropriated for one thing, but
They didn't do anything for the director.
Yes.
So they had to, well, I guess they just forgot about it and they had to go back up but that's the kind of thing that happens sometimes when the legislature meets. They'll cut out something and not realize what they're doing.
Oh, they've cut out.
That's right. But these are some of the things that we do.
Okay, why don't you talk about those?
At these institutes for health workers, the Polio
Tell about
Institute,
those things. About
and
some
this
of the-
demonstration project to show that something must be done for these children besides custodial
Can you
care.
explain this demonstration project?
No, I really can't. Wally, could you explain this?
This Wally Bonnifield,
Which one?
the demonstration project. Wally Bonnifield is the executive director.
You want that explained?
Yes, this is where the cerebral palsied children who, at that time, this is of course back in the early 30s, many people felt that nothing could be done for spastics at that time. And they were considered to be hopeless in many cases. And this is where an outside team came in and worked with children to show just what could be done with these children, for these children through particularly physical therapy, proper medical care, training, utilization of specialized equipment that they had at that time, and things of this sort. Large numbers of professional people attended this meeting and saw the demonstration, were later able to bring much more assistance to children who have cerebral palsy or spastic conditions.
Mm-hmm. Let's see, the convalescent hospital facilities that were built. Can you tell about that? Do you know anything about that, or the wheelchair loan pool?
Well, we just had them, and that's what we loan them to them. We don't charge them anything here.
No, the wheelchair loan pool is something that we've had for many years. These are usually for short-term loans for people in need who cannot afford to pay for them themselves. And we loan them out all over the state. We carry them to the home. The child is placed in these chairs. They're able to get around. They're mobile. When they are finished with these, then they return them to the society, and we make them available to other handicapped people.
Is this supported primarily by the Easter Seal program?
Yes, it is.
I wonder, this I'll ask either or both of you, what portion of the budget of the Society for Crippled Children comes from Easter Seals, and what comes from other things? Who can best give us the answer on that?
At the present time, Penn, well over 50% of our budget does come from the Easter Seal campaign held during the spring or 30 days before Easter of each year. Just recently, we have inaugurated a membership campaign which people responded to very generously, and we are raising increasing amounts through memberships. Another source is our Rotary Club 100% clubs all over the state, and other organizations where each person of a club contributes $3 as an annual membership. And then the Oklahoma Coaches Association also makes an annual contribution, which has amounted to approximately $160,000 in the last 20 years.
What is the budget, total budget?
our total budget for this year, as of August 31, 1971, will have been about $145,000.
I think, Ms. Calvert, in the period that you've worked with it, I know that really some of the most interesting things and sidelights may be some of the cases that you may know about. I know that as a board member that you don't get involved with the cases that like the director and some of them might, and yet I know that there are individual cases that you may be familiar with, situations where someone has benefited from the Crippled Children Society in a particular way, or where someone maybe who has had the benefit of it has been able to achieve, and maybe achieve much more than average, but partly because of this. Can you think of any particularly memorable occasions dealing with individuals that might be worth mentioning?
Well, there's many of them that I think probably the program that they have in the summer I hear more about than anything, the recreation programs that you have for the children camp programs.
Tell about that.
Go ahead.
Well, we just send them up there with a worker, and they could spend 6 weeks.
Programs. I'm just wondering if you, over the past few years, came in contact with a special case that you may have been able to follow through, Ms. Calvert, all the way through, that you would like to tell us about.
I don't believe I can.
I think it might be worth mentioning some of the people who are handicapped people who have been unusual achievers. There certainly are some. I can think of a number. I can think, for instance, he was not handicapped as a child, but I think of someone like Oral Peak, who, in my opinion, is one of the outstanding educators and personalities who is completely incapacitated physically, can't get out of a wheelchair. But and I know that there are others who have achieved. C.H. Spearman, I think, is an example of a legislator who can't walk up a step and who can't who can't move without crutches. There are these are two good examples, and I know that there are many more. Are there any that you all can think about, and particularly some that you may have come, either of you may have known as a part of the Crippled Children's program, who benefited in the training program or in one way or another from your program, who have made outstanding contributions? Ms. Wally.
Penn, I'm a little bit concerned here. I don't particularly like to name names of those we've helped, but I am thinking of a very...
there's no disgrace to being helped by this. It's
no, absolutely not, but some people are a little bit sensitive concerning this. But I'm thinking of a case that occurred about 2.5 years ago of a vocalist at one of our local colleges who's a very excellent vocalist, who was one of approximately 12 siblings in the family, and she had a great deal of major dental work with no way of having the dental work performed, and their teeth straightened and pulled and etc. And the society did step in this case, and I might say that she's gone on and is currently working her way up the ladder to success as a vocalist. I'm thinking of another case where we extended medical care and treatment and equipment to help a young man, a dwarf, as a matter of fact, that apparently had very little hopes, but in investigating the case originally to see whether we would take a hand in this particular case, We had very good reports from his teachers who said that he was a very brilliant person, and we did extend help and over a series of several months, and he has now, I think, successfully graduated from high school and has gone on to college. I think in the years ahead you may very well be hearing from this young man. I would say, again, another example of one of our more current programs. We have a referral now from a smaller town in Oklahoma from a rather frantic mother because her child, having been through kindergarten twice, is unable to read and unable to vocalize. Yet the tests show that this child is not retarded. And she's asking us where to turn to for help, and we intend to assist her in developing a complete adjustment testing series, which we hope then that the teachers can use in the hometown to properly train and work with the child. I was in Lawton, Oklahoma the other day, and visiting with two teachers who happened to be from Hobart. And they were commenting on our vision screening program, where we've screened over 9,000 last year. And they said that as a result of our vision screening and referrals, 2 children in their classroom are now wearing glasses, children that they did not suspect of having any type of eye deficiency. There are numerous examples of this type. If you would like, we could take you over to our files and probably fill out quite a few
I bet you could.
on an individual basis.
Mm-hmm.
The thing that we probably, Ms. Calvert, I'm sure would join me in emphasizing is that this is a statewide program, and we've tried to shift and emphasis and focus public attention in areas that needed attention, funding, professional people, professionalized attention to the needs of the handicapped in that special area at any one time.
She would not do so, and I don't want to embarrass her, but why don't you comment a little on the contribution that Mrs. Calvert has made in this program over the years?
Well, Mrs. Calvert is a very modest person. She, for instance, probably would be the last one to say anything about her services on our Care, Treatment, and Education Committee. And she's made a...
Why don't you comment a little on the contribution that Mrs. Calvert has made in this program over the years?
Well, Mrs. Calvert is a very modest person. She, for instance, probably would be the last one to say anything about her services on our Care, Treatment, and Education Committee. And she's made a contribution to planning. She has also made a contribution at, I believe it's 5 White House conferences, which she has attended, representing both the society and the state of Oklahoma as a specialty in the area of handicapped children and adults, particularly children. She brings to the board of directors a wealth of experience and knowledge concerning specific needs of children, their relationships in the home, what a child should have in the way of treatment and services, what they are actually receiving. She understands organization and structure and the need for this, even in a voluntary agency. But she is very much more capable of looking at the broad picture. In other words, the broad aspects of medical care and treatment, the broad aspects of special education and the need for the different types of classes, such as learning disabilities, emotionally disturbed, retarded, classes for the physically handicapped, and other types of classes and training. I think that she early recognized the need for services under vocational rehabilitation and the need for special training of the handicapped to prepare them to take their roles as tax-paying citizens and to not be dependent upon welfare as a way of life. And over the years, consistently, while working in the upper strata of planning and organizing and motivating other people, she's always opened her heart on the personal level of working with individuals. And again, I say that she's too modest to say this, but I'm not too modest to say this for her.
Thank you all.
Why don't you tell us, Miss Calvert, a little bit about the White House conferences?
Well, I've been to 4 of them, and some of the things that I think has helped me more than anything else is attending the division of Handicapped and knowing a little more about it. And the picture that they give of your treating the child first just as a child and his handicapped second. But to give, he has all the needs and all of the desires that a normal child has. But he just needs help in understanding himself and in becoming a part of society. And I think one of the greatest needs that we have is for, even when these people are trained, that there's no use in training them unless they can get a job and go to work. And I think that's one of our big greatest needs now.
Wally, do you have any suggestions of things that we ought to ask her in regards to the Crippled Children Society that we might not have? You want to pose the question?
Well, I think, Ms. Calvert, do you, the question I would see that from your perspective, have there been definite changes in what we consider to be crippled?
Yes, I think there's been a lot of changes, and I think the emphasis that has been put on it since we've had Wally here has been, well, the prevention and the long look at the whole picture of the handicapped and what his needs are. Because first, what Wally does first is think of the child as a child with all the needs that anybody has, and then of his special needs as a handicapped child.
But in the early days, Ms. Calvert, it was a society, what types of activity? Were they heavily engaged in remedial type?
Remedial. That's really what we thought about. We weren't thinking too much about prevention, and but there was so much of the need, you see, because nothing had been done. So in the early days, why, every clinic we'd just have more people than we could possibly take care of.
I believe you told me that it was very often the clinics would run from 9 in the morning until 10 at night, and it was not unusual to have 150 or maybe even 200 at a clinic.
That's right.
And in those days, you were sponsoring as many as 50 or 60 clinics per year.
That's right.
Is that right?
That's right.
Did you consider, did you work in that early day with orthopedic, spina bifida, osteomyelitis types of cases versus, rather than, say, speech and hearing?
Yes, I think it's all just mostly orthopedic. I don't think we really thought about speech being a handicap, at first.
Did you, you've been involved in the hiring of handicapped, I mean, in this program that they're promoting the hiring of handicapped. Tell a little about that and how it began.
Well, I think it actually grew out of the actual need of no use in trying to help a handicapped unless you can let him go all the way and really become self-respecting and having a job to do and being a part of society. And I think we've had a lot of help from a lot of people that can't name all of them that have really helped to put a lot of these little tykes on jobs and have sponsored them and paid for education in a lot of instances, individuals.
I'm going to turn the tape over to the other side, and when we do, I want to, or after we do, I want you to talk about some of the, you've worked in a number of civic things over quite a few years, and I'd like for you to think about some of the people you have worked with, both in this society and in other civic things that you feel have helped to build Oklahoma City. People who may be people of the past now, who may not be here now, but with whom you've had experience and would like to discuss something about.